Imagine this. It's the dawn of the Cold War, a time when fear, suspicion, and espionage permeate every corner of the world. But what if, in the midst of this global tension, two ordinary American citizens were caught in the crossfire of history's most dangerous conflict? What if these two people were accused of one of the most heinous crimes, giving atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, putting the entire Western world at risk of nuclear annihilation? And what if those two people were you and your spouse, the Rosenbergs, the couple who changed history, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the very names that sparked a firestorm of controversy in the 1950s, would leave an indelible mark on the world, their trial reverberating through history, like a shot heard round the world. But were they guilty? And if so, what did they truly do? Was their execution in 1953 an act of justice, or a tragic miscarriage of it? This is the story that has fascinated generations, and the answer may surprise you. It's the early 1950s. The Cold War is in full swing. The United States, once the shining beacon of freedom and democracy, now finds itself locked in a deadly struggle with the Soviet Union for global dominance. At the heart of this tension lies the atom bomb, a terrifying new weapon of mass destruction that could obliterate entire cities in the blink of an eye. Before we dive into the gripping details of espionage, betrayal, and one of the most controversial trials in American history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from the Cold War era. Drop a comment below. Do you think justice was served in the Rosenberg case, or was it a tragic mistake? Let's get in it. In 1945, the United States, led by President Truman, dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending World War II. But this victory soon became a nightmare as both the US and the USSR developed a deadly race to stockpile nuclear weapons. Spies, subterfuge, and secrets were the currency of the Cold War. Enter Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a seemingly average couple living in New York City. Julius, an electrical engineer, and Ethel, a secretary, had been involved with the American Communist Party for years. They lived modest lives, raising two sons, but their personal beliefs would soon entangle them in one of the most sensational espionage trials in American history. The beginnings of the case, the roots of the Rosenbergs case, lie in the years following World War II as tensions between the US and the Soviet Union escalated. The Rosenbergs, although not high-ranking members of the Communist Party, became entangled in a network of spies who were determined to share America's atomic secrets with the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Soviets successfully tested their own atomic bomb, catching the US by surprise. It wasn't long before intelligence agencies such as the FBI began suspecting that there was a mole inside the US government. The key question on everyone's mind: who gave the Soviets the secret to the bomb? In 1950, the FBI arrested Klaus Fuchs, a German-born British scientist who was working on the Manhattan Project during the war. Fuchs's confession to passing secrets to the Soviets sent shockwaves through American intelligence, and he named several individuals involved in espionage activities, including Julius Rosenberg. This revelation set off a cascade of investigations, leading to the eventual arrest of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in the summer of 1950. The investigation and arrest. The FBI's investigation into the Rosenbergs was swift and methodical. Julius had been working on classified projects, and his connections with known Soviet operatives raised suspicions. Evidence against him began to mount. Ethel, on the other hand, seemed to be an unwitting bystander, but as the investigation continued, it became clear that Ethel had been far more involved than originally thought. The couple's arrest was part of a larger crackdown on suspected communists in the US during the Red Scare. The McCarthy era was in full swing, and paranoia was Rampant, the Rosenbergs were accused of conspiring to provide the Soviets with vital information about the atomic bomb, information that, if true, could tip the balance of the Cold War in favor of the USSR. In March 1951, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were brought to trial. The prosecution, led by attorney Roy Cohn, painted a damning picture of the couple as spies working to undermine America's national security. They claimed the Rosenbergs had given the Soviet Union detailed atomic bomb secrets that would allow them to build their own nuclear weapons. The defense, however, insisted that the Rosenbergs were innocent. They argued that the charges were based on flimsy evidence and circumstantial testimony. But as the trial wore on, the atmosphere was charged with ideological fervor. The prosecution focused on the Rosenbergs' communist affiliations and their connections to spies within the U.S. military and government. The most damning testimony came from David Greenglass, Ethel's brother, who claimed that he had provided Julius with atomic secrets while working at the Los Alamos laboratory. Greenglass testified that Ethel had typed up his notes, which were allegedly passed on to the Soviets. His testimony was later revealed to have been heavily influenced by the prosecution, and his motives were questioned as he hoped to avoid a lengthy prison sentence himself. Despite the weak evidence, the jury convicted Julius and Ethel of espionage. Julius was sentenced to death, and Ethel received the same fate, though she was considered by many to be a secondary participant. The Rosenbergs' fate would now rest in the hands of the courts and the public. The execution. On June 19, 1953, after a lengthy appeals process, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed by electric chair at Sing Sing Prison in New York. Their deaths were met with worldwide outrage and protests. To some, they were martyrs, innocent victims of the paranoid, anti-communist hysteria that gripped the U.S. at the time. To others, they were traitors who'd sold out their country for ideological reasons. In the years that followed, the case remained controversial. Many believed the Rosenbergs had been the victims of a flawed justice system, while others insisted they had committed treason by aiding the Soviet Union. Julius Rosenberg, the idealist or the traitor? Julius Rosenberg was, in many ways, a man of his time. A product of the Great Depression, he believed in the ideals of socialism and communism as a means to achieve justice for the working class. But was he driven by a deep ideological commitment to the Soviet cause, or was he merely swept up in the fervor of the time? Was he a passionate idealist or a cold-blooded traitor? Ethel Rosenberg, the innocent victim or the co-conspirator? Ethel Rosenberg's role in the case has been the subject of much debate. While her actions were certainly controversial, was she truly a willing participant in espionage, or was she an innocent bystander who was unfairly implicated? Was she executed for political reasons, or was there genuine evidence to convict her, the government, justice, or political agenda? From the perspective of the U.S. government, the Rosenbergs were guilty of a grievous crime. The Soviet Union had been their enemy, and in the wake of the Cold War, they needed to send a strong message. But was the case about justice, or was it about politics? Did the government use the Rosenbergs as a symbol to scare the public and quell fears of communist infiltration? Public opinion divided nation. The case divided America. Some saw the Rosenbergs as victims of a Cold War witch hunt, while others saw them as a dire threat to national security. The execution sparked protests, and people across the globe debated whether the Rosenbergs deserved their fate. Julius Rosenberg, the idealist who wasn't afraid of sacrifice. Julius Rosenberg was born in 1918 to Jewish immigrant parents in New York City. Like many others from poor immigrant backgrounds, he found himself deeply affected by the injustices of society, the poverty he witnessed, the class struggle, and the widespread oppression. From an early age, Julius gravitated toward ideals that promised a better world. The Communist Party, which advocated for the working class and criticized the capitalist structures of the U.S., became a natural outlet for his ideology. However, Julius's commitment was not merely intellectual. He became involved in more than just the party. He was an active participant in espionage. Julius wasn't just the intellectual, detached party member. He was someone who believed that his actions, selling atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, would not only end the Cold War, but also create a world that was more equitable for the working class. The idea of sacrifice was central to Julius's belief system. He truly believed that this ideological cause, even at the risk of his life, was worth it. In the face of rising tensions, when fear of communist infiltration was rampant, he refused to back down. Was it idealism that led him to pass secrets? Or was it a deep-seated belief that the survival of humanity depended on dismantling US dominance? The tragedy of Julius's character is that, while his actions were born out of a sense of duty and justice in his mind, they ultimately contributed to one of the darkest chapters in Cold War history. The painful irony is that while Julius felt that he was fighting for a just cause, the trial turned him into a martyr for both sides, those who opposed US imperialism and those who feared communist subversion. Emotionally compelling scene. Imagine Julius, sitting in a cold, dimly lit interrogation room, trying to explain to the FBI agents his vision for a better world. But with every word, he realizes that his vision will only lead to his execution. He still holds firm to his beliefs, but knows the price of standing up for them. Ethel Rosenberg. The innocent or the victim of politics? Ethel Rosenberg's role has always been contentious. Unlike Julius, there is less tangible evidence that she actively participated in espionage. She had no known expertise in atomic energy, nor did she have access to the critical secrets that her husband, Julius, allegedly passed to the Soviet Union. In fact, much of the evidence used to convict Ethel came from the testimony of her brother, David Greenglass, a key witness whose credibility was deeply questionable. David's testimony claimed that Ethel had typed out secret military documents that her husband had obtained. His description of the events, however, was inconsistent, and in the years following the trial, it became clear that his motivations were personal. He was trying to reduce his own sentence, hoping to spare himself the same fate as Julius and Ethel. It's possible that Ethel had no idea of the full scope of what Julius was involved in, but that didn't matter in the eyes of the prosecution. Ethel was in many ways a product of her time and circumstance, a mother caught in the wheels of a political machine. She had been a homemaker, a mother to 2 young sons, and by many accounts, a loving and caring wife. The question that lingered in the minds of many was she guilty? Or was she simply the victim of guilt by association? Emotionally compelling scene. Picture Ethel in the courtroom, sitting there, hands trembling as she holds onto a small locket containing pictures of her children. She's not guilty of espionage, yet she knows that her husband's fate is tied to hers. She wants to protect their sons from the nightmare that's unfolding. In her mind, the trial is not just for her life, but for the future of her children. David Greenglass, the betrayer or the man who wanted to live. David Greenglass, Ethel Rosenberg's brother, was the man whose testimony ultimately sealed their fate. A machinist who had worked at the Los Alamos laboratory, Greenglass confessed to providing Julius with military secrets related to the atomic bomb. In his testimony, he claimed that his sister Ethel had typed up the documents he gave to Julius. Yet the reliability of Greenglass's statements has always been under scrutiny. Was Greenglass simply trying to save himself from the death sentence, or was he motivated by a genuine sense of betrayal? In the cold light of history, we know that Greenglass's testimony was flawed. His own actions in the case suggest a man deeply conflicted about his role in the affair. Yet in 1951, in the tense climate of McCarthyism, it wasn't about seeking truth. It was about finding a scapegoat to preserve national security. Greenglass later admitted to lying about several key points in his testimony, especially regarding Ethel's involvement. His decision to point the finger at his sister, a mother and wife, was seen by many as a betrayal of the highest order. The Rosenbergs were executed, and Greenglass, though guilty himself, avoided the death penalty. Emotionally, compelling scene. Picture Greenglass, sitting alone in his prison cell, his mind racked with guilt. He is haunted by the face of his sister Ethel, her innocent eyes looking at him for reassurance, and he realizes that his words, his lies, will lead to her death. The prosecution. Roy Cohn's crusade for justice. At the heart of the prosecution stood Roy Cohn, a young and ambitious lawyer who would go on to become infamous for his role as Senator Joseph McCarthy's chief counsel during the Red Scare. Cohn was a zealous prosecutor, driven not by the facts, but by an unwavering belief in the necessity of punishing those who threatened national security. In Cohn's eyes, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg weren't just spies. They were enemies of the state, willing to undermine the very foundation of American democracy. They had conspired to hand over atomic secrets to the Soviets, and for that, they needed to be eradicated. Yet, the prosecution's case was based on questionable evidence, and many of their witnesses had dubious motivations. The trial wasn't about delivering justice. It was about making an example of the Rosenbergs. The Cold War needed its martyrs, and the Rosenbergs would be just that. Emotionally compelling scene. Imagine Roy Cohn in the courtroom, standing with an air of righteous fury. He doesn't care about the evidence. All he sees is an ideological war that demands victory. His belief in the case is unwavering, even as cracks in his own argument begin to show. The public and media reaction. Divided America. The trial and execution of the Rosenbergs sent shockwaves through American society, deeply dividing public opinion. The 1950s were a time of intense paranoia. McCarthyism was rampant, and the fear of communism was at an all-time high. The U.S. government made an example of the Rosenbergs to show the world that America would not tolerate espionage or disloyalty. However, the global reaction was mixed. In the Soviet Union, the Rosenbergs were hailed as martyrs who had given their lives for the cause of peace and socialism. In Europe, where the Cold War was seen as an ideological battle for the future of the world, many sympathized with the Rosenbergs and saw them as victims of an unjust trial. In contrast, many Americans saw them as traitors who had put their country's security at risk. Emotionally compelling scene. The execution of the Rosenbergs was broadcast across the world, and scenes of protests, some in the U.S. and others internationally, added fuel to the fire. Families, civil rights groups, and intellectuals began speaking out against the trial, claiming that justice had not been served. The image of the Rosenbergs walking to their deaths became a symbol of the Cold War's human cost, the enduring legacy. Years after the Rosenbergs' execution, their case continued to haunt American history. New revelations, such as the declassification of Soviet archives, have painted a more nuanced picture of their involvement in espionage. While some argue they were guilty of passing secrets, others believe they were part of a larger systemic issue of espionage in the U.S. Was the execution justified? Did they deserve to die for their beliefs, or were they victims of a political climate that demanded sacrifices? The Rosenbergs' legacy, ultimately, is not just about their guilt or innocence, but about the lengths to which fear and suspicion can push a nation. Their case serves as a chilling reminder of how justice can be perverted when fear overrides reason, and how history often judges the events of the present with the clarity of hindsight. The final shot of the film, cuts to a courtroom decades later, where an innocent man, like Julius, could be put on trial today, and the question looms, how far have we really come? The devoted revolutionary or the martyr for a flawed cause, Julius Rosenberg's commitment to communism, and by extension, his belief that the Soviet Union was the answer to the world's problems, made him a deeply divisive figure. Raised in the harsh realities of the Great Depression, Julius came to view the US as a country where the ruling class was exploiting the working class, and his ideological leanings were shaped by a fierce desire for equality and justice. But what sets Julius apart from many other spies is the deep contradiction in his beliefs. On one hand, he was a devoted revolutionary, fully committed to a cause that he saw as righteous, a cause he believed was necessary to avert nuclear war and create a more just world. On the other hand, his actions, specifically stealing atomic secrets from the US government and sharing them with a foreign power, had potentially catastrophic consequences for the very world he sought to protect. Picture Julius in a flashback, speaking passionately to a small group of fellow communists in a dingy apartment. He's a charismatic speaker, emphasizing the need to fight capitalist imperialism and describing his vision of a new world. His comrades listen in awe. The atmosphere is electric, and Julius's eyes burn with conviction. But then, in a moment of introspection, his face falters, as if he's already sensing the weight of the choices he's making. A subtle glance toward a family photo of his wife and children might reveal the personal stakes. He knows the path he's on could destroy everything he loves. The tragedy here is that Julius was not some cold-blooded traitor out for personal gain. He was a man who truly believed in the righteousness of his actions. In his mind, giving the Soviets the bomb was an act of solidarity with oppressed people everywhere, an attempt to level the playing field and stop the US from monopolizing nuclear weapons. However, as history would show, the consequences were far more complex, and, in his zeal for the cause, he underestimated how easily ideology could be manipulated. The silenced voice and the heart of the family Ethel. Rosenberg's role in the case is the most contentious. Some saw her as a passive participant, an innocent bystander caught in the web of her husband's actions, while others viewed her as a willing accomplice. The prosecution, with Roy Cohn at the helm, painted her as a key player, describing her as someone who had knowingly helped her husband transmit atomic secrets to the Soviets. Yet the evidence against her was weak, most notably her brother, David Greenglass's testimony, which was later discredited and revealed to be motivated by self-preservation. Emotionally compelling scene. Ethel is portrayed sitting quietly, in a dark courtroom, her face pale, almost ghost-like. Her two young sons, Michael and Robert, are with her in the gallery, unaware of the gravity of what's unfolding. Ethel watches as her brother David, someone she's loved her entire life, gives his damning testimony. The weight of the accusation against her is unbearable. The weight of the injustice is palpable. For these protesters, the Rosenbergs had become symbols of everything wrong with the political climate of the time. The legacy, the price of ideology, justice, and sacrifice, decades after the Rosenbergs' execution. New revelations about the case continue to stir debate. Declassified Soviet documents have confirmed that Julius did indeed pass secrets to the Soviets, though the role Ethel played remains uncertain. Some argue that they were victims of a political agenda, sacrificed to the anti-communist fervor of the time. Others claim that they were guilty of espionage and paid the ultimate price for their betrayal. The case leaves us grappling with fundamental questions. What is the true cost of justice? How much do we trust the systems we rely on to uphold the law? In the case of the Rosenbergs, the answer remains elusive. Their execution serves as a stark reminder of how fear and suspicion can erode the very principles they seek to protect. Final scene. The camera zooms out from the historical footage of the Rosenberg's execution to a modern courtroom, where an innocent man is being tried for espionage in an atmosphere of heightened suspicion. As the scene fades to black, the haunting question echoes. Have we learned the lessons of history,